Hello, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I'm Aparna from IIT Bombay, and I'm going to discuss about a module on political economy of basic service provision in urban India. It is a paper from Sociology of Urban Transformation. So let's discuss what we are going to learn in this module. We'll learn the political economy approach to understand access to basic services like water, sanitation, and solid waste management in urban India. We'll also learn to understand, with the help of some case studies and examples across cities in India, how different sections of the population have inequitable access to basic services. In order to do this, we'll trace the trajectory of the basic service provisions from colonial times and discuss important milestones that shaped the current discourse in present times. Further, we'll be discussing different institutions that are responsible for basic services provisions in Indian cities, and to extend the discussion, we'll come to specific issues of solid waste management, water and sanitation with case studies, and at the end we'll discuss the issues and challenges pertaining to private participation, especially those of unaccountability and inequalities in inequitable access. The history of urban planning in colonial India was informed by the concerns of health and sanitation. Not much has changed since then. The Swachh Bharat mission, introduced by the central government in 2014, aims to spread awareness about sanitation and its linkage with public health. In India, the provision of basic services like water and solid waste management is the constitutional duty of municipal authorities. There are many agencies and institutions that are involved at various levels. For instance, in the case of water, there are water or gel boards, public health engineering agencies, and parastatal agencies of state governments, city level water supply and sewerage boards, and municipal governments, and a host of unregulated private companies. Again, the institution framework is different for each state, and there is no uniformity. Over decades, government authorities and various departments at the national, state, and local levels have not been able to adequately cater to the burgeoning needs of water, sanitation, solid waste management facilities of urban populations that are rapidly rising across urban centers in India. Shaban and Sharma point out that only 71% of households surveyed across major cities consider the quality of water supply to be adequate. So, another study of Water Aid in 2005 similarly points out that nearly 100 million urban dwellers will still lack access to improved water sources for domestic use in India. And even if the Millennium Development Goal of having the population without access to water and sanitation by 2015 is met, the percentage of urban population to the total population of the country stands at 31.6. So there has been an increase of 3.35% points in the proportion of urban population in the country during the year 2001 to 2011. Urban planning and basic services, a historical overview. Two important reports by health officials in mid-19th century Bombay by Henry Conybeare and Andrew Leith show the concerns of colonial administrators for public health, sanitation, and urban planning in India. First report on the sanitary state and sanitary requirements of Bombay, 1852, by Henry Conybeare, and the second report on the sanitary state on the island city of Bombay, 1864, by Andrew Leith, conceived traditional sanitation in India as problem and public health as solution. Chaplin notes that when the Royal Commission into the sanitary state of the army in India linked health with sanitation, the colonial administration responded by physically separating the army and British officials from the indigenous city, by building new cantonments and residential enclaves in the form of civil lines. As Chaplin notes, provision of new sanitary arrangements brought about a development of local government that had the power to collect taxes to finance sanitation services and public works across the subcontinent during the 1870s. In May 1882, the Viceroy Lord Ripon introduced his resolution on local self government, which shaped local government until the early 20th century. With the intention to create a political forum for the newly created Western educated middle class, this resolution also introduced a majority of elected non-official members on a limited franchise of Europeans and wealthy Indian ratepayers. The Indian middle class liberals took interest in civic affairs that affected their lifestyles, like recurrent epidemics, fires, and persistent stretch from unclean drains in slums. Further, Chaplin highlights how the outbreak of the plague in Bombay and Calcutta in 1896 brought an unprecedented level of medical and sanitary intervention into people's lives around the insanitary conditions and overcrowding in Calcutta and Bombay. Municipal reforms started with increased spending by municipalities on sanitation, the introduction of the mounting Chelmsford reforms of 1919, which transferred local government along with education, public works, and health to Indian control, as well as the establishment of improvement trusts in Bombay. And of course, in Calcutta, these were to address insanitary housing and congestion. These trusts demolished slums, built chawls for workers, created new arterial roads, and developed new housing estates. Solid waste management. Historically, solid waste management (SWM) remained a neglected area until the intervention of the Supreme Court of India that resulted in the Municipal Solid Waste Management and Handling Rules 2000 under the Environment Protection Act 1986. As a solution to the inability of municipal authorities to handle conservancy operations, the rules call for involvement of actors like community-based organizations, private contractors, and NGOs (SWM) functions. The SWM Rules 2000 mark a watershed in the management of solid waste in urban centers in India, as for the first time they laid out procedures for waste collection, segregation, storage, transportation, processing, and disposal. Second, these rules also specified standards for compost quality, health control and management, and closure of landfills. Third, these rules stress upon collection of waste from its source of generation, households, office complexes, and commercial areas, and give procedures for distinct treatment of different categories of waste. Fourth, the rules made the municipal body responsible to organize awareness programs for segregation and recycling of waste. Finally, the municipal authorities were required to adopt proper technologies to recycle and process waste so as to minimize burden on landfill as prescribed in the rules. It was expected that individual states would form their own rules on SWM, drawing copiously from the SWM Rules 2000. The rules are significant because for the first time there is mention of awareness campaigns, segregation and processing of waste with regard to solid waste. And the rules also partly shift the responsibility of SWM to citizens and organizations. Advanced Locality Management (ALM) groups and Slum Adoption Program (SAP) in Mumbai. In the face of inability to handle massive amounts of waste and also to counter the powerful trade unions of the Conservancy Department, the Municipal Corporation of Greater Mumbai (MCGM) outsourced its function. Community initiatives like ALMs were the logical outcomes. The ALM model gained popularity partly from the support of the MCGM
and partly from civic activism in the city to curb further strikes that threaten to halt basic services. An ALM is an identified locality, the residents and users of which have committed to improving the quality of life in close cooperation with the MCGM. It covers a neighborhood or a street with normally about 1,000 citizens. It is registered in a municipal ward office, which appoints a nodal officer to attend to citizen complaints. The ALM model was first implemented in 1996 through a pilot project of waste management in the residential colony of Joshilan in Ghatkopar East, which is a suburban area in Mumbai. There are as many as 50 ALMs spread across the 24 administrative wards of Mumbai. The Slum Adaptation Program (SAP) in the slum variant of ALMs. Under the SAP, grants are allocated to slum communities according to estimate population figures by the MCGM. The amount of the grant depends on the population of the slums, which in turn determines the number of volunteers required. From the allocated grant, payment is made to the SAP volunteers who purchase cleaning equipment like brooms, buckets, and those for the volunteers like gloves, masks, and boots. The work of volunteers includes sweeping, collecting, and clearing the garbage. If municipal toilets exist, they can also clean the toilets. Cleaning campaigns and advocacy work is also carried out under the SAP in slums.
So we'll also be discussing about water sanitation. The entry of private players in water sector has happened in interesting ways. For instance, Ruit et al. In their study in 2002 note that a large number of Indian cities considered the BOT option to develop new sources of water through international funding. However, the authors also explain that many of these projects fell through. The main ones were to be in Hyderabad, Goa, and Bangalore. So many of these projects they failed through due to the lack of political commitment, the very high cost of water, the lack of clarity in the contract attribution, and the lack of clarity in the process to be followed. The authors have also noted that private companies are widely involved in supplying water through tankers, supplying bottled water, providing piped water supply, rooftop rainwater harvesting, and recycling wastewater in urban regions like in Chennai, Rajkot, Kolkata, and Mumbai. Greater Bangalore Water and Sanitation Project in Bangalore. So Ranganathan et al. In their study about this project discussed the Greater Bangalore Water and Sanitation aim to connect people living in the outskirts of Bangalore to piped water and sanitation. And it stands as a good example of the broader trends and debates around market-based reforms in the water sector in Karnataka. By market-based reforms, the authors mean specifically to a policy move away from a reliance on public investment in the water sector to financing by users, municipal bonds, and various forms of debt. This project introduced the concept of capital cost recovery from customers. However, upfront payments from the beneficiaries, frequently termed as stakeholders, have not guaranteed timely and satisfactory services nor enhanced customer entitlements. The authors add that the term stakeholders creates an impression that the utility and the citizens have equal stake in the infrastructure. They have also pointed out serious disconnects between the model and the ground realities. The lack of attention which is paid to the rapidly and heterogeneity with which the peripheries of Bangalore were developing resulted in severe delays in installing pipelines. Miscalculations in the length of pipelines needed and low ability to service technically difficult areas which are typically poorer, unauthorized, and less able to pay for an expensive pipe water system. This in turn delayed delivery and undermined accountability in the project. However, connection and supply of water to richer revenue generating areas proceeded with few hitches.
Sanitation.
The report on Indian urban infrastructure and services 2011 notes that sanitation is a greater problem in urban areas than in rural due to increasing congestion and density in cities. It also points out the serious environmental and health implications of poor sanitary conditions in cities. The report also alludes to the Water and Sanitation Program study of the World Bank, which observes that the poorest 20% households living in urban areas bear the highest per capita income impacts of inadequate sanitation. The National Urban Sanitation Policy of 2008 that provided the framework for addressing the challenge of city sanitation emphasizes the need for spreading awareness about sanitation through an integrated citywide approach, assigns institutional responsibilities with a special focus on the urban poor. Next section will be discussing one such initiative that addressed the sanitation needs of the urban poor in Mumbai. The Alliance. The innovative partnership known as the Alliance developed between the Society for the Provision of Area Resource Centers, the National Slum Developers Federation, and Mahila Milan in Mumbai focuses on issues of land security, resettlement, and the entitlement of the urban poor to basic urban services. Within the Alliance, SPARC serves as an intermediary between the state and urban poor communities. After the strategy is decided, the leaders of the federation then explore the process and train community members. SPARC provides support, documentation, quality control, review, and scaling up. The Alliance has a focus on building community toilet blocks because toilets unite communities and give them the confidence to undertake something which they need and which they can actually do. Its initial experiences in building and maintaining such community toilet blocks comes from between 1988 and 1996 in Mumbai, Kanpur, Bangalore, Hyderabad, and Lucknow. As Chaplin notes, the Alliance has built relationships with the various levels of state bureaucracies, municipal corporations, the central government, and several of its authorities, and the private sector by not aligning itself with a particular political party. But such partnerships and their replication still remains a challenge. Chaplin explains that one of their major challenges still facing efforts to scale up successful low-cost sanitation projects into citywide schemes in India is that governments, bureaucracies, and the international agencies have not made the shift. Issues and challenges. The political economy approach to basic services makes it evident that private participation, whether through NGOs or private companies, has serious implications on the questions of equity and accountability. More often than not, it is the socio-economically weaker sections of society who are adversely hit by these initiatives. For instance, in the Bangalore study, the authors point out that the fringes around the city of Bangalore, where piped water was to be supplied, is a heterogeneous and haphazardly developed expanse mainly comprising unauthorized developments. These spatial patterns pose challenges to pipeline laying contractors. Local roads and sewers, wherever they existed, did not follow grid lines and did not link up with the main road and sewer lines. This made the process time-consuming. Some areas on the periphery, like the Bande Palya slum in Bommanahalli, that is perched on an abundant quarry and therefore technically more difficult to connect and offer far poorer, may never get piped water supply. Even after the completion of the distribution pipelines, only approximately 1 lakh connections have been provided as against a total estimated requirement of around 4,50,000 connections. From the cases of ALMs and SAP in Mumbai, A clear demarcation along class lines is evident in the prevailing SWM practices in the city. The greater involvement of communities has complicated the SWM scenario in Mumbai, resulting in a clash of interest on the ground. The MCGM has greatly divested itself into the sole responsibility of SWM by involving communities and passed on its obligatory functions to agencies that are often unaccountable. Workers receive an unfair deal in the hands of such agencies and lost their entitlements they once received from the government. The SAP has introduced change in nomenclature. For instance, the word worker was replaced by volunteer and the word wages was replaced by mandhan or voluntary work, without any corresponding changes in actual wages and social security. In fact, volunteers have a weaker bargaining position than regular conservancy workers because their services are contractual and can be terminated at any time. The question of SWM in slum communities and rehabilitated buildings remains a grave concern with no one in charge. Unlike A&Ms, SAP is not supported by middle-class NGOs, corporates, and private clubs. A&Ms are more powerful and visible in their SWM activities. Significant differences based on class situations could also be delineated between various ALMs spread across the city in terms of the services they commanded from the municipal authority and in terms of the visibility in the media and support they received from corporate houses. Many of the achievements of the prominent ALMs located in the Malabar Hills, Marine Drive, and Nariman Point, Juhu, and Andheri could be attributed to the strong social networks that were already in place through years of civic activism, advantages of geographical location, and frequent interaction with municipal officials. In her study, Bava documents the opposition to privatization of water in, in East Ward, Mumbai by hydraulic engineers of the municipal authority. She explains that the engineers were concerned that water privatization would completely take away their autonomy and oppose the project covered by mobilizing support of people and organizations. Their knowledge about water distribution systems in Mumbai and their relations with different sections of the population, including unauthorized slum dwellers, facilitated access of water to various areas which would otherwise be excluded if privatization took place. Many of the problems of accountability and equity in service provision can be addressed if private providers adhere to benchmarks that have already been created. The Ministry of Urban Development, Government of India, has prescribed service level benchmarks for a number of urban services. The benchmarks are important for shifting focus from the creation of physical infrastructure to service delivery because poor governance can create a situation in which additional capital investments in urban infrastructure do not result in corresponding improvements in service delivery. The author concludes that benchmarking for the urban water and sanitation sector is well recognized as an important mechanism for performance management and accountability in service delivery. Benchmarking involves the measuring and monitoring of service provider performance on a systematic and continuous basis, which results in better service delivery to people. So let's summarize what we have learned in this module. This module discusses basic service provision in urban India, employing the political economy perspective. This perspective is also useful because it helps us to understand how socio-economically weaker sections of the urban population are disadvantaged in accessing these very basic services. Even when these services are provided by the municipal authorities solely, the poor have inequitable access to basic services in cities. Economic and spatial restructuring have pressured municipal governments to raise revenue, attract investments into the city for infrastructure, real estate, tourism, and creating a brand image of the city. to become self-reliant and depend more on their internal resource and institutional finance. And that can range from raising funds on the bond market, entering loan agreements for infrastructure development, capital market borrowing, privatization, partnership arrangements, and community-based projects. So these kind of shifts in urban policy and practice have also resulted in the entry of private players into the water, sanitation, and SWM sectors. The discussion in this module also devotes special attention to each of these sectors with the help of case studies. The ensuing analysis brings out the implication of greater private participation by communities, citizens themselves, NGOs, or contractors, especially on the question of equity and accountability. While self-governments seem to have gone down well with the educated middle class and elite citizens who are well networked and live in well serviced neighborhoods, the same is not the case with poor neighborhoods like slums. Private participation, operating with a regulatory framework and following certain benchmarks may yield better outcomes. Thank you.